Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Gilda Hilaire, and I'm the Senior Product Marketing Manager at Salesforce. And today we have a very exciting discussion for you on making API calls featuring Greg and Tony and moderated by Corinna. And as always, just a little housekeeping before we get started. If you're new to these webinars, if you have any questions, please type them in the question box in your go-to-control panel. We will try to address these during the presentation at the end. We will also send the recording to the webinar and any documents highlighted. So please be on the lookout for that email, or feel free to reach out to me if you didn't receive it. Now, without further ado, we will get started. I will turn the time over to Tony to kick things off. So Tony, take it away.
All right. So the very first thing we wanted to do today is go over setting up your environment within Marketing Cloud to make these API calls. So we are going to run through a couple of the essentials for setup, and then run through authenticating for your API calls, and then go through some Ws Proxy, which is essentially getting at the SOAP objects. And I'm going to show you all this kind of stuff on a cloud page really quick. So the first thing to do any kind of REST API access or external SOAP API access is you need to set up your installed package within Marketing Cloud. So in the top right in setup, you'll go to apps and then installed packages. And then for the sake of time, I've already gone through and created one. So when you create it, you'll have to add a component in here and essentially designate how you want it to connect. So once you set it to your proper settings, and most of the time it's going to be a server-to-server setup, which is the most common. You can go in here and you can select your security settings for this. So this just sets the scope of what you can access and get at from this installed package from these set of credentials. And there's a lot of documentation on which credentials you need to have access to make, certain API calls. So once you go through and you select your scope, you'll have your client ID and your client secret, which is essentially like your username and password for the API calls. You have your authentication base, which is your REST endpoint that you need to make your initial authentication call to get your access token. And then you have your REST and SOAP base URIs, that is your endpoints to make your REST or SOAP calls. And then you have your additional parameters on top of that for your specific endpoints. So that's kind of how you set up for your installed package. And then you can also go in here if you have a multi-business unit, or you can go in here and designate which business units within your instance that you can access through this API. So then jumping over to a cloud page here, getting set up to make an API call, you have all your variables set for your values that you just received from your installed package. And then I have a function here that is a simple authentication function that simply takes in the authentication base. For a REST endpoint, you're going to go to the v2 token endpoint to get your access token. Your payload includes your client ID, your client secret, your grant type, and your MID, so your account ID. And then stringifying that payload, and then passing that through your HTTP post function to get your access token. and then setting this down to an access token variable. You're calling that authentication function, and then you'll receive your access token here that you can then take to pass on to any subsequent REST API calls that need that access token for pretty much anything else that you're going to do within Marketing Cloud for APIs. So then the next thing that we wanted to show you is a really simple use case for Ws Proxy. So if you're handling SOAP API calls outside of Marketing Cloud, you need to use whatever envelopes that you're using for that. Within Marketing Cloud, you can use Ws Proxy, which basically simplifies that whole process. There's some documentation on this. There's a lot of articles and resources around this as well. So it basically is a one-to-one relationship from the SOAP XML envelopes to what you're going to use for Ws Proxy. And then for this one, I just set up a really, really simple use case of receiving a customer key from a data extension name. So you have your configuration here for your columns that you're retrieving, your filter that is based off of your data extension name, and then your actual retrieve call there. And then once you receive this, you can get your customer key, your category ID, what folder it's in, and you can use that for any subsequent Ws Proxy calls or any other server-side JavaScript that you would need to utilize. And then the last thing that I wanted to show you guys really quick was a really neat trick that I picked up recently. Knowing what columns are retrievable from a Ws Proxy call can sometimes be kind of confusing. So there's a Ws Proxy function called describe that you can essentially get all of the attributes that are associated with that SOAP object. And then this function basically goes through and says, get all of those attributes and let me know which ones are retrievable. And then you can take that and then use that in your next Ws Proxy call. So for this one, you can see this comes up with an array of all of your retrievable properties, and then you can pass it through to your subsequent Ws Proxy call. So that's kind of in a nutshell how you kind of set up some of these scenarios in a cloud page, and these can also be used in script activities. And then we'll share these code snippets out so you have those as well. So then we want to start getting into questions, Karina?
Sure. Thanks for showing us all those demos, Tony. I definitely keep that describe function saved on a cloud page and use it every time that I'm getting ready to implement any type of API. The first things I do is make sure that I know exactly what's retrievable and return it to whatever party is wanting me to do the project to make sure that they have a clear idea of what it is that they can get. So let's hop into some questions now about our APIs. To start with, are there classes or resources you would recommend for someone who is brand new to APIs?
So I would probably look at, first there is obviously the official documentation that is a great resource, especially when it comes to the REST API. The SOAP API can be a little confusing jumping in. SOAP in general is confusing, so there is that. But the REST API feels pretty well documented. We have on how to SFMC, there's a post that I had done for introduction to Postman that will give a good setup with running through a lot of what Tony did with setting up a component in there and setting up your Postman library to be able to make those calls in there. On my site as well, goretonington.com. there's a recent article I made about using REST API inside of server-side JavaScript through the script.util, as well as some integrating with an outside service using side JavaScript. And then there's also a site, api.mcexperts.ninja, which sounds crazy, but it's actually a good alternative documentation for the REST API. And they also have the ability that you could download their environment setup as well as their full collection into Postman so that you don't have to start from scratch.
Great. So I'm going to hop in real quick. As a reminder, we are going to share out the code snippets that Tony shared after this when we send out the follow-up video as well. So you will get both the recording. Well, actually, you get three things. You get the recording, the slide deck, and some code samples this time. So happy Tuesday, everyone. It's API Tuesday. All right, so back into some questions. Besides Cloud Pages and Postman, are there any other programs you can use for APIs?
Yeah, I mean, I can't think of some names off the top of my head, but I know that pretty much anything that will run an API, you can use. Like it's not the Marketing Cloud version is nothing special. I know that sounds awful. Like I'm not trying to say that it's not awesome and robust. It's just compared. It's an API. Like it's the same as Joe Blow's service API. Like that's what it is. So I mean, anything that can use API should be able to connect to Marketing Cloud API.
Can the Marketing Cloud connector be used as an API connection between Marketing Cloud and an external data warehouse?
The connector? Is that what you said? The Marketing Cloud connector? I believe that only is for connecting to the Salesforce core, right? I believe Marketing Cloud connector is only kind of
you would need like MuleSoft.
Yeah.
Or some other Zapier, some other API connection tool. But yeah, the connector is Salesforce proprietary. You can also use it for Commerce Cloud, or they have another version of the connector as well. But yeah, that was more why I asked that one, was so we could kind of clarify for everyone what our connector for Salesforce does versus what the other connectors out there do. So thanks, guys.
Well, thank you. You kind of answered
it. And then how about in API, they want to know tips for API call response error handling.
So there's a little bit you can do in the way of try catch. I've gotten in the habit of anytime I make an API call, I wrap it in a try catch just so I can ensure that I'm getting some sort of a descriptive error if that does occur. And then the other habit I've gotten into is if I'm hitting a roadblock or am trying to debug a script, making sure that the payload that I'm passing into that API call is what I expect it to be by writing that out before it actually hits the API call. So that way I can know exactly what's being fed into the post or the get, and then I can troubleshoot down the line from there.
Yeah, the other part to keep in mind too is that, especially when making calls out, what functions you use to make the calls will determine what kind of errors you get. For instance, if you use the http.post or get through either server-side JavaScript or AMScript, if you don't get a 200 response, it'll actually throw an error. So like the API call itself will just error out. The script.util will actually, you have the ability to change it so that you will receive the error response instead of having the page or script activity toss an error. So you can get some more detailed response handling that way. I believe with the HTTP post and get that you don't actually get that response. You're not able to pull out what caused that error, just that it was not 200. So there is a bit of a blind spot there with using those, but again, it depends on your preference on what you'd rather have your actions and your different responses.
Then to kind of piggyback off of that, what are some best practices that you two would recommend for getting callback information for an API triggered email? So in addition to error handling, I guess post now error handling and processing.
So I think really the transactional API is the only thing that really has a built-in callback. Outside of that, I mean, you would have to do it as you would with really any other email. You'd have to go in, you'd have to query against the sent and the click and the open resources in there and try and figure out if it was actually sent out and delivered, if they opened it or if they clicked. It's not an easy webhook or anything like that, like the transactional API has set up. There is no special sauce there, unfortunately, at least not that I'm aware of.
All right, and what is the best way to refresh your token when you have multiple sessions or between sessions?
Well, with V2, there is no way other than just when the token expires, you get a new token. That's really, there isn't a, like in V1, I believe there was a refresh token option. There was an endpoint there, but with V2, it's literally just when you can set a timer, and when the timer's almost up, you just have it run the call again. That's really it.
And everyone should, according to Salesforce, be trying to use V2 over V1, as V1 is considered
absolutely,
deprecated now. So just as an FYI, for anyone new to Marketing Cloud, you will find V1 documentation out there, but it is no longer best practice to use V1.
Yeah, and I believe there's a lot of endpoints that are coming out, and all new ones that will only accept V2 authentication. So that, yeah, you'd run into a lot of issues if you tried to keep using V1.
Yep. All right, can you provide more background on the difference between the protocols when you use Rust versus SOAP, and even just the differences between Rust and SOAP for those that are new?
That's a big conversation.
I know. Very high level for those that are new.
Simply put, and this is just my opinion. This isn't anything official capacity, but use REST as much as you can. REST is the simpler protocol by far. Most of first off, it's built in Json, so I mean that alone is a huge benefit. SOAP is built in XML, and it's very literal. So what could take like 100 lines of SOAP could be about 20 to 30 maybe lines of REST. So I mean, it's really the simpler one. That being said, though, the thing to take into account is anything, I would say a good portion of what's inside of Email Studio is SOAP only. So there is going to need to be times that you use SOAP, but REST when you can.
There's a lot of times where you'll need to use both and kind of pass data between both REST and SOAP. And it works pretty seamlessly. So, but yeah, I definitely agree. Use REST when you can.
Other part too is the auth token goes in both. So that same token that you're using in REST, you can also use in SOAP. There's no need to get a specific token for each different protocol.
And one of our attendees would like to know how to send JSON and XML from an external application to Marketing Cloud for email and content blocks.
So I'm sorry, run that by me one more time.
So, for example, I know my company, we send an XML component within our transactional emails, and that's what has basically our order piece. So they're wanting to know how to send that via API to Marketing Cloud to be able to use. So can you get into Marketing Cloud so that we can look through and you treat as content or parse JSON or whatever we want to do, but they want to know how to get it in and the best practices. So I'm guessing they also want to know kind of how to package it, because I know we've had some issues with new developers that have broken our API feed just by putting in a special character and not encoding it. So those kind of, I'm guessing that's what my guess would be. So yeah, feel free to comment if I'm way off on your question, please.
So I mean, there's a lot of things to consider in that. So like there isn't a one size fits all answer to that, because a lot of it also depends on the sending service. Like how it's coming out. I know, for instance, inside of Marketing Cloud, when you send out through server-side JavaScript or anything like that, you have to actually have the payload be a string in a lot of cases. So even though you're sending an object or an array, it has to be an actual string data type when it's pushed through for it to be sent across and received. So there's different nuances like that that need to be paid attention to. And for instance, like Karina was just saying, you need to escape different characters inside of it so that it will be able to recognize what is supposed to be what, like so that it doesn't say, hey, this curly bracket means that this is now an object, when that was literally just used as part of a string or anything like that. Like there's different little nuances there that need to be paid attention to. Again, the issue is a lot of it is also environment based. So I mean, depending how you're sending the payload across inside of your service, there's different things to pay attention to. I know it's kind of a cop-out answer because I didn't really answer it. I gave a very political statement there, but it's hard to give more than that without specific information. I don't know if Tony has anything.
No, I think that covers the how do you set it up to get it into Marketing Cloud, and then to kind of come full circle with that. One of the things that I've seen done is taking that payload, that XML or JSON, and then passing that into a data extension, then parsing that with AMP scripts. I know in one of my previous roles, we used to take an entire XML payload in and then use AMP script to parse that XML and push that into an email for an order confirmation. So as far as getting that from the external service into Marketing Cloud into an email, that's one of the more seamless ways that I've seen it done, where it just kind of flows in and then everything pulls from that data extension.
Are you able to trigger multiple or different emails from one single API call?
I honestly have not tried it. I don't believe so. I believe it's a one-to-one relationship. Each call is pointed to a single one, because I know especially at REST it's not possible, because the trigger definition, I believe it's either the key or the object ID is included inside of the endpoint, so there's no way to put multiple there. I believe the same is true with SOAP. I honestly, well, not that it's in the endpoint, but it's a one-to-one relationship is true with SOAP as well. I honestly have not tried it, so I can't guarantee that. But from what I've seen and what I understand, it's only possible with one at a time.
Is there a way to pass an SSL certificate and an API call from Marketing Cloud?
I've seen that before. I have not found a solution to that. Sending it from Marketing Cloud to another service, it's because it's a file. So like it's the way that Marketing Cloud's server scripts are set up. That's not really an option. So it becomes very difficult for it to work. Like you could try different. I've seen people try to encode it and send it across as an encoded file, and it hasn't worked in most cases. Really, I would say fairly confidently it's not possible through the Marketing Cloud interface. If you set up something outside and just have Marketing Cloud connect there through like a GET or something, or send data across to that other endpoint, it will work, but Marketing Cloud itself will not.
Do proxy calls count towards your API call limit?
That would be a Salesforce question.
But yeah, I wouldn't be able to confidently say yes or no.
But
Yeah,
if you do host it on a cloud page, it does count towards your super messages every time.
yes.
So we
Yeah.
do know that answer.
Yeah, I would say I don't think that they've strictly begun handling the API limits yet. I know that it's on the docket and it's coming down, so it's definitely something to keep in mind. But I'd say for the immediate future, it's not a huge worry.
All right. So when using the HTTP GET function to call an API in AMP script, I get duplicate hits against the endpoint. How can this be avoided?
I've never heard that. I've not
So this would
experienced
definitely
that
be a good
before.
one to even reach out to the how-to community that Tony and Greg and I are a part of, and we can help you even troubleshoot kind of on the fly and maybe get some more details. Because I would also like to hear more about this and hadn't run into it. So. So yeah, hopefully we will see you soon on the how-to community, Brad. And then can we host Angular Vanilla JS in Cloud Pages and retrieve data from a third party?
So anything server-side other than server-side JavaScript and AMP script, you can't host on a cloud page. It's just that's the way that they have everything set up. It's not possible. Again, if you use an outside resource and call that in, you can use it that way, but it can't be on cloud pages itself or microsites or landing pages, anything, any landing page type resource that Marketing Cloud offers. I mean, it makes sense. It's a security issue. Because I mean, at that point, you can inject something in, and then all of a sudden, you have control of Marketing Cloud. I think they want to prevent that.
Yep. All right, our next one. Can you go through the process of using an authentication token to authenticate a REST API call in a custom journey activity?
Sorry, I'm trying to.
I know that was a mouthful, wasn't it?
Okay, so you
So they
want
want to authenticate and make a REST API call within the context of a custom journey activity.
Okay. Yeah, I've explored that where you pass along inside of the journey, you pass an authenticated environment for that then custom activity to make an API call. Is that a correct understanding? I believe from the question, is that what's being asked?
I believe so. I'm seeing if they were following up at all. I don't see. We'll go with yes,
Okay.
unless they chime in and say something different.
That is possible. There's a bit that goes into that because you have to, when you pass information from the journey to the package, you then have to take that information, and inside of that, I'm sorry, the terminology is a little off on what I'm saying, so don't take this as explicit direction, but there inside of that there's different little sub objects that you then have to expand, and inside of that there's some different tokens and endpoints that you're able to push to. The thing that I found is that sometimes those do not have correct permission settings to handle some of it, but through those you can then gather the information you need and make a call to an auth endpoint to get a new token or similar. So like it is possible, depending on what you're doing will determine how you do it. So it's best I can give is yes, the information you need is there. It's just collecting it and utilizing it. Sorry for all these political answers. I feel like I'm not giving a lot of very detailed information. I apologize, but that's the best I can get for that.
Well, this one you'll be able to give a lot of info. Should all API calls happen in Ssjs?
I'm going to say yes. I am a huge Ssjs fan, and I think that it by far has better API capabilities than AMP script. The one thing to consider is that AMP script usually winds up being a little faster, so it depends on what the purpose of the API call is and how secure and safe you feel on it. So like if everything around it is going to be handled in AMP script and you are receiving something that AMP script can easily translate and push out, you could probably do it in that, but Ws proxies and server-side JavaScript, script.utils and server-side JavaScript. There's a try-catch inside of server-side JavaScript, just to name a few examples of where it comes in to be a little more robust.
Yeah, there's a lot of benefits to doing it in server-side JavaScript over the AMP script alternatives. Also, just the fact of what could take you, 25 lines of AMP script to set up an API call, take you a very small amount of code to actually set up in server-side JavaScript. So, yeah, that's definitely my go-to as well.
Right. Next question. Is there a way to monitor when customers take actions such as unsubscribing in real time using the REST API?
I know there's capability to build webhooks. I'm not sure that this would be a good use case for it, because that would probably wind up being a huge draw on the system, because that webhook would have to constantly be in communication with a fairly significantly sized database that is constantly processing things. So I would say a scheduled call would probably be better to just validate against the previous call and your previous settings, and doing it that way rather than real time. But outside of that, you could talk to Marketing Cloud Services, see if they have anything to offer you that's built in the back end. But from what we're capable of, I would say don't do it.
Yeah, I agree with that.
All right. Can I use the API to pass Marketing Cloud data to third-party systems using the API? And if so, how?
So you want to pass Marketing Cloud information to an outside service?
Yes.
Yeah, that's absolutely possible. You would just do the lookup, gather the information inside of the required payload, and then just same as anywhere else, make that API call. So like you would do a post to the specific endpoint, and then I'm assuming it's REST because most places use REST. You would just put the JSON object or array inside of the correct order and format, and then just push that across, and it should work. I mean, you're going to need authentication and all of the headers and everything that are required, but yeah, that's 100% possible, and I've seen it used very well in a lot of places to create some really robust custom integrations across different tools.
So how about, while we're on this topic, let's hear some of your kind of governance and payload best practices to make sure that you don't take out your systems.
Yeah, there's it's almost Wild West-ish right now. There is nothing really official. Yeah, like it's really difficult to give that. I would say in general, volume and frequency are two things to pay the most attention to. Like if you're pushing really heavy things in fairly regularly, you're probably straining the system. Like for instance, I've had people go, hey, instead of dropping a file on the FTP daily to upload, these 10 million records we have, we want to use the API instead and push them in asynchronously. And it sounds, in theory, the right choice, because it allows it to be more real time, and it's the preferred method in a lot of places. On Marketing Cloud, it's unfortunately not. The APIs are not made to be high frequency nor bulk endpoints, so like it's really not best practice to use them for main data transfers when it's large records or in high frequency. It's more of a touch up, like a, hey, these 10,000 people were updated on this form, let's shoot them over kind of thing, and not, full database transfer. I mean, again, that's not a lot of huge information. It's very general, but like it is the Wild West out there. There is nothing official that I've seen. There is on incoming API to Marketing Cloud, they do have some I'm going to call them fail safes. They're not actually fail safes, but it's the best word I can think of to help prevent you from spamming the system, which includes tossing errors saying that you sent too many API calls in, or things along those lines to help. So that's one thing to pay attention to as well, that just because you can doesn't mean it's going to work.
All right, next question. The var names which we add at the start of creating an environment in Postman should be the same in the post call. For example, they're using the authentication endpoint /v2.
Yes.
Yeah. Yep.
So pretty much as you would make an API call in a cloud page, you can hit that same exact endpoint. Your payloads are going to be the same. It's 100% one-to-one. And if you're testing out to make sure an API post will work, you can hard code values in your Postman environment, and if it works in Postman, it'll work in your cloud page and your script.
So besides triggering an email, what are some of your favorite API use cases?
Oh, man.
I know. That's why I saved it towards the end, so in case you needed to go on forever.
I am a huge fan of being able to create assets programmatically through the APIs. That has been one of my favorite things to do over the last couple of months, and it's like you're a magician that just magically appears in your instance. And it's one of the coolest things that I've been able to do within Marketing Cloud. In a real world type environment, if you have a bulk amount of an asset that you need to create that something changes throughout, you can programmatically create those assets rather than having to manually go through and change them all one by one, which is really, really powerful, really cool.
Yeah, I'd have to say my favorite project that I ever had was very similar to what Tony was just talking about. It basically, I created an auto scheduler, an auto import system, and it would then, I'm sorry, I said that backwards, an auto import system that would then go to a CMS to actually create the assets based off of the imported information and then schedule it. So it would run through an entire process and basically take away what would be campaign management's 20, 30 hours a week that they would use to be able to set up all these emails and get that all set up. It was done automatically every week with, I would say, probably 40 to 60 hours of development and testing and QA and all of that, and it's 20 hours a week that are gone now of manual labor and error checking and human error and all of that. So it's powerful. I mean, again, you have to use it in moderation because you don't want to automate everything and then overload the system with all of these crazy processes and API calls running, and with them adding in different API limitations in the future. It's something to keep in consideration when making these things too.
All right, we've had another question come in. Do we need to use Core's extension to integrate Marketing Cloud with external pages that are not a cloud page?
I mean, that really depends on the communication. Like, if you're looking to have an outside service or page make a call to a cloud page, yes, I believe by default the core setting on cloud pages is to, for lack of a better term, prevent it. So you'd have to either adjust on the cloud page itself through the header, or you'd have to otherwise account for that. As far as the other way, again, it depends, I believe, on the receiving page. Like, it's how your settings are set up to be able to allow or disallow that kind of I can't even think. Relationship? I don't know. Connection. There we go. That's a better one. That's a better word for that.
All right, and then we had someone, I apologize that I missed this one earlier when we were going through some of the other earlier steps, but someone wanted to know the difference between the V1 and V2 versions of the API.
Well, the only things that are really V2 right now are the authentication stuff. That's specifically V2 is only there. Everything else is still technically V1. That being said, a lot of them, especially the newer ones, even though they say V1, will only accept the V2 token. That's for security and to help make it a bit more streamlined. So I mean, really, that's the only difference is the authentication capabilities really between V1 and V2. Everything is going to move to a V2 environment, but it's confusing to put it out there because they say V1 and V2, but the only place that has a V2 is the authentication, but that authentication is going to affect all of the V1 endpoints. So like it's hard to explicitly define that, but yeah, I would say that's really it, is just the connection between Marketing Cloud and your service that's utilizing it. That's really the only difference is that security there.
And then can you two talk more about the connectors like MuleSoft and Zapier and kind of the pros and cons of using a tool like that versus your own API?
I've never really used MuleSoft. I've explored it once at a previous position, but it really didn't suit the needs that we needed. It was very heavy for what we needed. But yeah, I don't have too much experience with MuleSoft or any other external API hubs, essentially.
Yeah, I think Tony hit the nail on the head there. They usually are fairly heavy. The pros and the pros of it first is that you don't need to build and support your own custom solution. You have something that you know works and you know has a whole bunch of developers around it to help make sure that if something falls over, they take care of it for you, compared to relying on internal services. So like there's that sense of security there, and it also prevents that huge lift in development hours up front, where you then have to just pay that extra cost of the monthly fees and all that. The cons being that this is not a custom solution; it's a almost out of the box solution that they've set up for you. So there's some loss of creativity. There's also the large overhead that comes along with any general solutions, in the sense of similar to like a WYSIWYG. When you use that, it's adding in a whole bunch of extra, for lack of a better term, crap to be able to handle a bunch of different situations and make it as safe and secure as it can. So I mean, it's not as clean as you could make it, but again, it depends on your resources and your comfort level and a lot of different factors that need to be included there. They're absolutely a viable option, and I've seen tons of places use them well, but it's not a be all end all solution for everyone.
Alrighty, and now we're going to switch gears a little bit, and we've had a few people ask if you could give us a kind of quick drive through Postman and how you're using it for APIs.
Sure. Here, give me 1 second. I can try and grab the screen. It's I have no idea how to do that in here. I don't know if someone needs to pass me something, but it's not.
I do. Hang on 1 second. I'm trying to find you here. There we go. All right, you should be able to pick it up now, Greg.
Yeah, trying to find the right one to share. All right, that should be sharing now. Does everyone see my
Yep.
wonderful dark mode Postman? So with this, it's pretty simple. Right now I am using the environment from the I'm just going to call it Ninjas. It's the one that I mentioned in the beginning, the alternative resource for it. It's I think I've kind of transferred over into that. I think it's a very clean environment setup, and I really have enjoyed it. So basically what you'd do is you'd have all of your information here. I have it changed to where it's just the subdomain, which is the tenant specific aspect of the endpoint, which you'll see here. And then the rest of it is filled out. Then a client ID. And by the way, this is all just fake information that I actually pulled directly off of the Marketing Cloud Ninjas site there. This will get you nowhere. By all means, enter it and try it, but it won't connect anywhere. So that being said, I can't make these calls to actually run a full call here. But then you just have the client ID that you saw from the package. Again, Tony went over this in the beginning, showing you all the information inside of the client that you would go to gather this. And then you have the client secret. Now, MID isn't necessarily needed. If you leave it off, wherever this package is hosted will automatically be the account ID associated with it. So you can add this in if you want. The good thing about it is if the package or component has permissions across different business units, you can, sorry, you can use the same information here, the same endpoint, and just change the MID, and it'll get you into the different business units. So in general, that is the basic setup for how to set up an environment inside of it. And then over here, you'll see I have all of my calls set up. Or here, this is requesting a token. This is the body that you would send to. This is the URL. This is the method right here. You would select what you want, what you need there. This is where you actually make the call. And then headers, you'll notice that there's not much here needed for this one. I want to show these are all the hidden ones. These you don't have to worry about. That's just stuff Postman automatically adds to help make your calls a little easier, so you don't have to add in a bunch of stuff that's not necessary. Actually, I think I forgot to mention the last. Yeah, I also always add inside of the environment a field called access token. This you can then use inside of a lot of the others to transfer across. I have inside of tests, I put a little JavaScript snippet that basically looks to check if an access token is returned. If it is, then it fills this variable up here automatically with that token, so that you can then inside of another call, like here, let's say get user information, you have the authorization, and then here it'll fill in that token there, which I have different naming conventions, so I apologize there. But yeah, you just put your access token variable here, and then that would fill it in based off of the most recent token that was put in there. But most of the time with the headers, most calls you're just going to need the authorization and the content type inside of Postman is actually usually automatically filled in. When you change it up here, you can change, like for instance, if it went to raw, and then you have a drop down here of what type you want, you can select JSON, and that will add the application JSON content type automatically to the header. I usually go in and double check because there's been times that it hasn't worked that way. But I mean, in general, at that point, then after you've made your request call and you have this one all set up, you just click send, and it'll go through and give you the information and return whatever you need. Each one of the calls, which you can grab from that site that we're going to send out with the Ninja site, that they have everything set up where they have all of this stuff, all of the bodies in there. So all you got to do is kind of plug and play. So that'll help set up a lot. It's let me see if I can grab that site real quick. Let me pause share so I can. Let me see if I can find where that one is, so I can share that real quick and show you where to. All right. So here is the site. You can see it's api.mcfs.ninja. So here, what you want to do, download it, is right up here is the run in Postman, and that will actually download their entire collection over here of everything they see, which includes a little bit of SOAP. That's not all of the SOAP, and this is all just the current, which a well-known secret is there are some undocumented REST endpoints that are available. It's really, if you go through the /rest on the for instance here, let me if you go through, let me pull up content builder, come on. Here you'll see asset before the V1. If you then changed this part here to REST, R-E-S-T, it would then return all endpoints associated with that. Now, that being said, one thing to keep in mind is that these are undocumented, meaning they are not officially supported, which means if anything goes wrong, it's on you, which also means that at any moment, Marketing Cloud can stop supporting it. They can change the way it's handled. They can decide to do whatever they want with it, and there's nothing you can do. It's not an official endpoint. So I always
And it
want
won't
to
be
say,
in release notes since it's not official.
yes, you'll get absolutely no notification on anything with it. So that being said, like, it's use at your own risk. There are times that were for single off projects or things like that, I find them super helpful, but I would not recommend implementing anything that is going to be a recurring or highly important process or automation using these. So I just wanted to share that real quick, and then
And we'll make sure that we share this URL as well in our follow-up email for those of you asking. And I do have a couple more questions that have come in, so I want to make sure we get to these since we only have
sure,
5 minutes
yeah.
left. So the first one is how to use API calls in Automation Studios. Does each script activity need, or should each script activity only have one API call?
No, script activities can have multiple API calls in them. I put, God, I don't even know how many, because I've created for loops that run through a good like 2 or 3 calls per row, and I've had rows of thousands. So I mean, really, it's considering timeout, because remember, script activities usually, I think by default, run 30-minute timeout process, so you have to account for that. You also have to account, again, volume and frequency. You got to make sure that you're not overloading something. But yeah, outside of that, like, you can shove 1 million in there.
All right. It was mentioned earlier that API should not be used for bulk data transfers of millions of records, but instead using the FTP transfers / data imports. Are there any other options to use for bulk data transfers from external systems?
That it's really a one way to do large transfers. Like, trying to use the API isn't, I don't want to say not possible, because it's possible, but it's very much not recommended. There's a lot that can go wrong inside of that, but outside of those two, I can't really think of any other way to connect the information other than just using that as the external resource and having like a data warehouse or some sort of API connection to that pulls the information in as needed into Marketing Cloud, and have Marketing Cloud no longer be the database of record. Instead, it's just accessing that for the information.
All right, and then this one, unfortunately, I don't think we'll have time to show. They had asked, can you show a REST API integration with a simple not cloud page to an external system? So I think they're wanting to see an example where you're talking outside of Marketing Cloud. So I guess maybe, do we have any resources that they could go to instead, since we don't, because we only have 2 minutes left?
On my blog, I have a post, which is goretonington.com. I have a post about integrating with an external service. In my examples, I always use the script.util. I think it's the more versatile and more secure function. I believe it's slightly slower though. So if you're looking at, again, volume and frequency, you may need to consider using the post or get default functions in there. But in general, I would recommend it, and that walks through different types of calls that you can do. So I'll make sure to have that shared as well inside of the email at the end of this, so that's for you to access.
Great. And that will also be a good example for the person when they were saying that they wanted to transfer submitted data from a system to system. So I would recommend you also go to the blog for that. But yeah, so thank you, Tony and Greg, for your time today. I hope we've got everyone's questions answered. Feel free to continue to send us questions on the how-to community or via Twitter. We have lots of places where you can connect with us. We don't have any events next week. It's just barely September, so keep your eyes peeled for social media posts about our next activity, or an email coming out, because we do have some exciting events. We're just still getting the dates finalized. So we hope to see you all this month at later events.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.